Marcus Johnson sat quietly in the bustling emergency room, his chest growing tighter with each labored breath. His mother, Sarah, watched anxiously as her 12-year-old son's condition worsened, his dark skin taking on an ashen tone that made her heart race. They had been waiting for 3 hours, watching as other families who arrived after them were called in ahead of them. Sarah approached the front desk for the 4th time, her voice trembling with worry. "Please, my son can barely breathe. He needs help now." The receptionist barely looked up from her computer screen, mechanically repeating that they needed to wait their turn. Sarah couldn't help but notice how the same receptionist had immediately fast-tracked a young white girl with a sprained ankle just moments ago. The waiting room was a symphony of coughing, crying, and muted conversations. Marcus leaned against his mother, wheezing more severely now. His normally bright, energetic demeanor had disappeared, replaced by a frightening lethargy that made Sarah's maternal instincts scream in alarm. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they were called in. Dr. Thompson, a middle-aged man with graying temples, barely glanced at Marcus before declaring, "It's probably just anxiety. Kids get worked up sometimes." He didn't even use his stethoscope, didn't check Marcus's oxygen levels, didn't look at his medical history showing the severe asthma diagnosis. Sarah felt her blood boil. "Doctor, please," she pleaded. "He has asthma. This is different. Something's really wrong." But Dr. Thompson was already turning away, muttering about overprotective parents and wasting emergency resources. As they were ushered back to the waiting room, Marcus's breathing became even more strained. Other patients began to notice, throwing concerned glances their way. An elderly woman nearby clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "That boy doesn't look right at all." Then, in a heart-stopping moment, Marcus's lips began turning blue. Sarah screamed for help, her voice piercing through the institutional calm of the emergency room. Her son was dying before her eyes, and nobody seemed to care. The story captures the mounting tension, systemic discrimination, and human cost of healthcare bias. It builds slowly but steadily, drawing readers in through vivid details and emotional stakes. The emergency room erupted into chaos when Dr. Laura Chen, who was walking past the waiting area, heard Sarah's desperate screams. Unlike Dr. Thompson, she took one look at Marcus and sprang into action. "Get this child into trauma room 1. Now," she commanded, her voice cutting through the confusion like a knife. The same nurses who had been dismissive moments ago now scrambled to respond to Dr. Chen's authority. Marcus was quickly placed on a gurney, his limp body making Sarah's heart skip several beats. The boy's school backpack, still clutched in his hand, fell to the floor with a thud. Dr. Chen worked with practiced precision, immediately recognizing the signs of severe anaphylaxis combined with an asthma attack. "He's having a severe allergic reaction," she announced, quickly administering epinephrine. "Get me a nebulizer treatment, stat, and start an IV line." As the medicine began to work, Sarah found her voice. Through tears, she explained how Marcus had eaten lunch at school. The same lunch he always had, but today something was different. Dr. Chen listened intently while continuing to treat Marcus, her eyes narrowing as Sarah recounted their earlier interaction with Dr. Thompson. The monitors began showing improvement in Marcus's vital signs, his oxygen levels slowly climbing back to safer territory. Color returned to his face, and his breathing, while still labored, became less desperate. Sarah watched as her son's chest finally began to rise and fall in a more regular rhythm. Dr. Thompson, hearing the commotion, appeared in the doorway. His face paled when he saw the severity of the situation he had dismissed. Dr. Chen shot him a look that could have frozen fire. "We'll discuss this later," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. A young nurse, who had witnessed everything, quietly slipped out of the room and headed straight for the hospital administrator's office. She had seen too many similar incidents go unreported, and this time, she refused to stay silent. The systemic change that would follow was about to begin, though none of them knew it yet. The hospital administrator's office was quiet except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights when the young nurse, Jenny Martins, knocked on the door. Inside, she found Mrs. Davidson, the hospital administrator, reviewing paperwork. The story Jenny told over the next 15 minutes would set off a chain of events that would change the hospital forever. Meanwhile, back in the treatment room, Marcus had stabilized enough to speak. His first words were barely a whisper. "Mom, I was scared." Sarah held his hand tightly, her tears falling silently. Dr. Chen continued monitoring his vitals while documenting everything meticulously, not just the medical emergency, but the dangerous delay in treatment. Security footage from the waiting room was pulled, showing the full 3 hours and 20 minutes that Marcus had waited while his condition deteriorated. The timestamps were damning, clearly showing multiple instances of patients with less urgent conditions being seen first. Dr. Thompson was called into an emergency meeting with the hospital board. His face had lost its usual confidence as he watched the video footage of himself dismissing Marcus without proper examination. The board members' expressions grew increasingly grave as they reviewed Marcus's medical charts, the security footage, and Dr. Chen's detailed report. Word spread through the hospital staff like wildfire. Other nurses and doctors began coming forward with similar stories they had witnessed but never reported. Each account added another piece to a disturbing pattern that could no longer be ignored. Local news reporters, tipped off by an anonymous source, began gathering outside the hospital. The story was quickly becoming bigger than just one incident. It was exposing a systemic problem that plagued not just this hospital, but healthcare institutions across the country. By evening, Sarah received visits from both the hospital's legal team and patient advocacy representatives. But unlike what they expected, she wasn't interested in a quick settlement. "This isn't about money," she told them firmly. "This is about making sure no other child goes through what Marcus did today." The next morning, the story exploded across social media and national news networks. Videos from the emergency room waiting area showed Sarah's multiple desperate attempts to get help for Marcus. Dr. Chen became an unexpected hero, with many praising her quick action and moral courage to speak up against her colleague. Hospital management called for an urgent staff meeting. The large conference room was packed, with some staff members even standing along the walls. Dr. Thompson sat alone in the front row, his usual swagger replaced by a haunted look. The hospital's chief of medicine didn't mince words. "What happened yesterday was a complete failure of our system and our values." Medical records from the past year were reviewed, revealing a disturbing pattern. Statistics showed that minority patients consistently waited longer for treatment and received less thorough examinations. The numbers were impossible to ignore. African American children, in particular, waited on average 45 minutes longer than white children for emergency care. Dr. Chen stepped forward during the meeting to share her perspective. She spoke about growing up as an Asian American and facing discrimination herself, but more importantly, about the oath all doctors take to treat every patient with equal care and respect. Her words struck a chord with many in the room. Outside the hospital, protesters began gathering. But instead of anger, they brought stories, hundreds of similar experiences from different hospitals across the city. Community leaders organized peaceful demonstrations, calling for systematic changes in healthcare. Marcus, now recovering at home, watched the news coverage with mixed feelings. "Mom," he said quietly, "do you think things will really change?" Sarah hugged her son, noticing how the incident had made him more serious, more aware of the world's complexities at such a young age. The incident sparked a nationwide conversation about medical bias. Other hospitals started reviewing their own practices, and medical schools began strengthening their training on racial bias in healthcare. What happened to Marcus was becoming a catalyst for change that would affect thousands of lives. A week after the incident, the hospital unveiled its comprehensive new action plan. The changes weren't just superficial. They were transforming the entire emergency room culture from the ground up. Every staff member, from janitors to senior doctors, would undergo mandatory bias training. But more importantly, new protocols were put in place that would make treatment delays virtually impossible. Sarah and Marcus attended the hospital board meeting where these changes were announced. The room fell silent when Marcus, still showing signs of his ordeal, stood up to speak. His voice was quiet but steady as he shared how it felt to sit there, struggling to breathe, while people around him acted like he didn't matter. Dr. Thompson had been suspended pending investigation, but he did something unexpected. He asked to meet with Marcus and Sarah privately. In a small conference room, with tears in his eyes, he apologized. Not just a formal, legally scripted apology, but a genuine acknowledgement of how his biases had nearly cost a child's life. The story caught the attention of state legislators. They began drafting a bill, now known as Marcus's Law, that would require all hospitals to implement similar anti-bias measures and tracking systems. Healthcare advocacy groups from across the country reached out to Sarah, asking her to share their story. Dr. Chen was promoted to head of emergency services with a special mandate to overhaul the triage system. She installed cameras in the waiting area that were monitored by senior staff and implemented a new system where waiting times were tracked by medical urgency rather than order of arrival. Every patient's vital signs would be checked within 15 minutes of arrival. The hospital's new policies became a model for others. Medical schools began using Marcus's case as a teaching tool, showing future doctors how unconscious bias can have life-threatening consequences. The security footage from that day became part of their training materials, a powerful reminder of what happens when healthcare providers let prejudice cloud their judgment. Local community leaders organized town hall meetings where people could share their healthcare experiences openly. These sessions revealed more stories of discrimination, but also stories of hope and change, since the new policies were implemented. 1 month after the incident, Marcus returned to school with a new sense of purpose. His experience had turned him into an unexpected young activist. During a school assembly, he bravely shared his story, encouraging other students to speak up against any form of discrimination they witnessed. The changes at the hospital were showing remarkable results. Average waiting times had dropped significantly for all patients, regardless of their background. The new monitoring system caught several potential bias incidents early, allowing for immediate intervention. Staff members reported feeling more aware of their unconscious biases and better equipped to provide equal care. Dr. Thompson, following his suspension and mandatory training, made a surprising career change. Instead of returning to emergency medicine, he requested to join the hospital's diversity and inclusion team. His first-hand experience with recognizing and confronting his own biases made him a powerful advocate for change. Sarah was invited to speak at medical conferences across the country. Her powerful testimonial about Marcus's experience brought many healthcare professionals to tears. She shared how a mother's worst nightmare had transformed into a movement for positive change in healthcare. The local community rallied around the cause. Churches, schools, and community centers organized health advocacy workshops. They taught people about their rights as patients and how to recognize and report discriminatory treatment. The workshops were attended by both medical professionals and community members, creating valuable dialogue. Hospital staff began noticing a cultural shift. The emergency room, once a place of tension and implicit bias, became a model of efficient, equitable care. Other departments in the hospital started adopting similar protocols, creating a ripple effect of positive change throughout the institution. As Marcus recovered fully from his ordeal, he started a student group at his school focused on healthcare equality. The group organized visits to elementary schools, teaching younger children about their rights to proper medical care and the importance of speaking up when they see injustice. 1 year after the fateful emergency room incident, Marcus stood at a podium in front of the state capitol. Governor Williams was signing Marcus's law into legislation, making their state the first to require comprehensive anti-bias measures in all healthcare facilities. The audience included doctors, nurses, politicians, and countless families who had similar stories. Dr. Chen had implemented her reformed emergency room protocols at 5 other major hospitals, with dramatic improvements in patient care across all demographics. The waiting room where Marcus once struggled to breathe was now equipped with advanced monitoring systems and staffed by professionals trained to recognize and respond to bias. Dr. Thompson had become a respected speaker on medical bias, sharing his personal journey from being part of the problem to becoming part of the solution. His honest acknowledgement of his past mistakes and dedication to change had earned him respect from both medical professionals and community members. Sarah's advocacy work had grown into a national movement. She'd established the Equal Care Foundation, which provided resources and support to families facing medical discrimination. The foundation also offered scholarships to minority students pursuing careers in healthcare. Marcus, now 13, had fully recovered and was thriving. His school group had expanded to other schools across the district, creating a network of young advocates for healthcare equality. He'd discovered a passion for medicine and dreamed of becoming a doctor himself someday. The hospital where everything started had become a national model for equitable healthcare. Regular audits showed consistent treatment times across all patient demographics, and patient satisfaction scores had reached record highs. Medical students from across the country requested rotations there specifically to learn about bias-free healthcare delivery. As Marcus finished his speech at the Capitol, he looked at his mother in the front row, both of them knowing that their painful experience had sparked a revolution in healthcare. Their story had transformed from one of discrimination and near tragedy into a powerful catalyst for lasting change, proving that sometimes the most significant improvements come from the darkest moments.